Hey, John, with a conversation that matters for January 2018. Wanted to talk a little bit today about police brutality, violence, the use of force, and whether such tools are used against minorities to a greater extent than they're used against, let's say, Caucasians. The reason I want to progress this discussion is because in the past I have made videos about Black Lives Matter. I have cited studies. For instance, there was a study last year that Harvard put out that police were 20% less likely to use lethal force against black people than they were white people. So if I cite that study, the response I get often is that, well, that doesn't comport with my experience. I live in a neighborhood where the police do target minorities, and I've been the victim of such targeting. And what I often hear are things like, well, the police followed me for one night and pulled me over, and there was no reason for it. Must have been because I was black. Or, they'll just say the community I live in just seems to have an air of ethnic superiority. For instance, I walk into a diner and everyone turns their heads, must be because I'm black. Or women clutch their purses tighter, men lock their doors, or go to the other side of the street if I'm walking down the street. And I've heard these stories from multiple people, and I guess what I want to say is I don't discount those stories at all. Actually, to be honest with you, my heart goes out to you, and I'm really sorry that that you had those experiences, especially if they were, motivated by some kind of discrimination. What I did want to say, though, was I've never shared my stories in these discussions. I tend to just share the findings that studies have come out with, and I kind of leave it at that. I just don't think, my stories carry a lot of weight. But I was having a discussion last year with a coworker who happens to be black, and I realized that my story probably should be shared a little more. He was complaining about the fact that the police target him more, and it occurred to me that I just hadn't shared with him, and we both would drive for a living as part of our job, and I realized that because I hadn't shared my experiences with the police, he felt, I think, alone, and that he was the only one that was undergoing such things. I just didn't talk about it. And I found that I think a lot of people, Caucasians I should say, that look more like me, we just don't tend to talk about it as much. We don't assume that we're being targeted because of our race or something else. So I'm going to just share a couple of stories. These are true stories from my own life, and then and then I'll give you the conclusion, what I want to draw from this. So one of the stories is when I was 14, I was a Boy Scout. I had a Boy Scout uniform on, and I was selling popcorn at a school, actually, where my church at the time was having a program, a youth program. And I was walking, the school was right next to the church. I was walking from the school to the church. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and a spotlight came on me from a car. And it was dark, I couldn't see the car, so I actually ran. And I ducked behind this rock wall. And out of the car, I couldn't see who it was, but steps a person, and he runs towards me, and without identifying himself, he grabs me right here by the neck, and he says, "Get in the car." And that's all I heard. And I screamed and I said no, and then the next thing I heard was, "Don't worry, kid, I'm a cop." Now, immediately I was suspicious. I didn't see a siren, or hear a siren. I didn't see any lights. I didn't see a uniform because it was dark. So I backed up towards the lights that were coming off the church that I went to, and I noticed something. This man had a police uniform on, and he noticed something. I had a Boy Scout uniform on, and we both kind of looked at each other. He still had his hand here, and I said to him, I screamed, I said, "You're not a cop. Cops don't scare little kids." And he was probably a shorter guy, so I don't know. We were probably around the same size, even though I was 14. But I guess I was a little kid to him, in my own estimation. I was scared. And he said, "I'm going to loosen my grip, or I'm going to take my hand off, and when I do, I'm going to show you some ID, so don't run, okay?" And he was trying to calm me down. So he took his hand off, and immediately I slugged him in the face, and I ran. And I bolted into the church, and he came kind of staggering behind me, and he had a welt on his forehead. And there was a woman there who was working at the church who kind of like separated us and got my parents involved, and all he wanted was an apology from me, but he did threaten me with I could go to juvie for this. And I think my dad was having a hard time not laughing because of just the situation was comical for a number of reasons. And I'm not going to go into all those reasons right now, but that was one experience I had with a police officer. So that kind of scarred me when I was little. I didn't really trust police officers so much. As I progressed and I got a driver's license, I remember one of the first times I was pulled over, I was going to, it was a line dance. It was a basic, I guess a club if you want to call it that, but it was a place where you did line dancing. And I had my jeans on, my flannel shirt, I had a cowboy hat. I was ready to go, and I get pulled over, and a police officer steps up, says, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" At my window, and I said, "No, honestly, I was obeying the speed limit." And he said, "I smell gunpowder." I said, "You smell gunpowder?" He says, "Yep, I smell gunpowder on your truck." Well, what proceeded to happen was the police officer searched me, like actually patted me down, searched my vehicle without a warrant, and couldn't find anything, so he let me go. The only thing I could think afterward was I had a Second Amendment bumper sticker, and I wondered if, because I was pro Second Amendment, maybe he didn't like that. I think most police officers probably do, but maybe he didn't, and I couldn't figure out why I was pulled over. Not too long after that, in the next few years, there were a number of times I was pulled over on the same road, actually. And one time was because they said I was swerving all over the road. I was not. They just let me go. There was another time I was pulled over, and it was because they smelled marijuana, and said that there was weed on me, and again proceeded to search me, threatened to search the vehicle. Didn't end up searching it because I protested, but again, there was no legitimate reason to pull me over. So those are just actually a few. There's other stories I could talk about. Those are probably more the major stories I would be able to share about my encounters with police officers. Now, what am I supposed to draw from that? Am I supposed to draw, they pulled me over because I'm white? They pulled me over because I'm conservative, especially with that Second Amendment bumper sticker? Am I supposed to think that I was discriminated against because I was a Boy Scout? What am I supposed to draw from that is my question. And what I've always drawn from it is just that it was a fluke thing. I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and obviously in God's sovereignty he allowed it to happen, but the police ended up, profiling me and pulling me over and suspecting something that wasn't true. I wonder whether or not some of this, and I'm not doing this to say that stories from minorities about police discrimination are not true today. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we should probably examine some of those stories at least, or at least apply the same rule. First, let's assume first that it is possible that we might have just been at the wrong place at the wrong time, instead of jumping to it's racism. Now, I understand if it happens in the same community a lot to your friends, and it's happening to you repeatedly, well, maybe you would assume that. But again, what am I supposed to assume, as a white guy with these experiences? And I told some of these stories in more detail to the friend I was previously talking about, and I remember his reaction was, maybe it's not because I'm black. Maybe that's not the reason I've been pulled over. Maybe it's just the way the police operate. And sometimes police do stupid things because no one's perfect. And I was kind of happy actually about that. Because his stories weren't really, there was nothing said ever by the police officer that indicated racism. It was really more just, he happened to pull me over and I couldn't think of a reason. It must have been racism. And that's what I'm encouraging us to try to abandon. Let's not just assume the worst first. Let's wait until there's more evidence that clearly indicates that racism is the motivation for such actions. So that's my encouragement. And kind of, I guess, me sharing a story that I've been bottling up about this issue, and just haven't thought was really that convincing, but testimonials, I guess, mean more to some people than studies. So there you go. Hope that you found that entertaining, and for whatever it's worth, you liked it. So anyway, have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.